Addiction, substance use disorder, alcoholism, drug dependence. No matter the label, its authority reigns supreme in the minds and in the bodies and in the spirits of those who suffer with it. Addiction is an illness of isolation. It hijacks the brain, it steals souls, it tears apart families, it trashes communities, and it frustrates social workers. Addiction baffles first responders and it antagonizes law enforcement, while at the same time addiction deceives policymakers. Addiction makes good people do bad things. It causes moral people to act immorally, and loving people to hurt those they love and who love them. Most of all, addiction, substance use disorder, alcoholism, drug dependence, whatever you call it, you know that addiction does not discriminate. In this regard, it is the great common denominator. Addiction does not discriminate. Addiction kills. Let us take a moment to pause and get settled in our seats. Get ourselves centered. And in this moment, let's remember somebody that you know who has not made it as a result of addiction. But today isn't about addiction. Today isn't about substance use disorders. No, today is about the antidote to addiction. And what is that? Well, the antidote to addiction is our reason for being here today. We who are men and women in recovery, we who are teenagers and older adults, Jews and Catholics, Muslims and Protestants, Baptists and agnostic and atheists, black and brown, white and red, all colors of the rainbow, all of us, we who are members, family members, who have healed despite it all, we who are counselors and therapists, treatment providers and doctors and nurses and clergy, all of these people are part of the we as well. Here we are, living the solution to the problem and celebrating the truth about recovery. Recovery is real because recovery manifests itself in the minds and the bodies and the spirits of we who are here today. Welcome everyone to Substance Use Disorder Talks, or for short, Sudtalks. I'm your MC for today. My name is William Moyers, and I'm from the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, based in Minnesota, where, as we speak, a foot of new snow is falling on the already 4 feet of snow that we've had this winter. And so if anyone out there today is feeling sorry for themselves or suffering from a lack of gratitude, I want you to remember that after this event is over, you're all going to go home to somewhere right around here. And I'm going to go home to where winter still reigns supreme. Now, I can tell you've got a higher level of gratitude already. I am your MC for today's Sud Talks, which makes me nothing really more than a glorified timekeeper. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to keep us moving. I'm going to keep us on time. I'm going to get us out of here on time after the questions and answer period we're going to have at the end of this formal talk. And by keeping us on time, I'm going to make sure that when we take an intermission here, about a third of the way through this talk, instead of a 20-minute intermission, we're going to make it a 10-minute intermission. I like that. Yeah, I thought of that too. Sorry, that was my ego. And I want everybody who goes out on the intermission to make sure you come back, and that you come back on time, please. I am the MC, which means I am a glorified timekeeper, which means I'm also the task master. It's my job to make sure that all of we behave. And as your glorified timekeeper and your taskmaster, as the herder of we, I ask that you help me out right now by putting your cell phones on vibrate or on silent. I don't want you to turn them off, because in this day and age of social media, which even old people like me are starting to really appreciate, social media is a critical way to get the message out there. Not to get the message of addiction out there, but to get the message out there of what we're here to celebrate today, which is the we of recovery. And so please, put your phones on silent, but use them. Feel free to take pictures and post. If you want to post to the Sudtalks Facebook website, it is Sudtalks 2019, all one, whatever it's called. If you want to tweet, the hashtag is Sudtalks 2019. And if you want to take pictures and post them to your own Facebook page, you can link back. It's still early in the game, that's right. Don't throw him out, it's going to be okay. Tell them I'll call him back later. Okay, there's always one in every crowd that tests me out here. But here we are. And by the way, the last thing I want us all to do, as the taskmaster, the one who's keeping us all moving today, I want you to give a big round of applause when I ask you to the two organizations who brought us together today. The Delray Beach Drug Task Force and Florida Atlantic University's Phyllis and Harvey Sandler School of Social Work. Can we have a round of applause and have those members stand up, please? Any members of the task force? Nancy, come on. Yeah, hey, hey, I don't like calling individuals out because this is a we effort and a we result, but I also really want to call special attention to two people who've been very critical to my engagement here and really critical to today's success, and that's Terry Shapiro. Thank you, Terry, at the back. Terry and I go way back. And also to Mort Simpson, who refuses to come out here. He's stage left or stage right, I don't know where it is, but Mort Simpson, wow. And you know what? You're a very compliant, good audience that's engaged. You're doing exactly as I asked you to do so far. Thank you. And I also want to thank our sponsors. Wow. I mean, look how many sponsors we have today. And we wouldn't have been able to make this happen without our sponsors. So let's give a round of applause to our sponsors. I have to admit, too, that since I am the MC and the taskmaster, I'm the one controlling the podium mic as well, and so I get a little extra time here. And I selfishly have to tell you that I love coming back to Florida from snowy Minnesota because I have a lot of friends and fellow travelers down here, and I have a lot of colleagues as well. A lot of people aren't aware of the fact that on the other coast, to me, Florida is just one big sunshiny state, but I know you kind of separate it by coasts and a panhandle up in Tallahassee and so on, and they're all great places, don't get me wrong. But in Naples, Hazel and Betty Ford has a facility there that's making a huge difference in the same way that the sponsors who are also treatment providers are making a huge difference as well. And I love coming back here because when I do, I get to see some of my colleagues, starting with Brenda Iliff. Where is Brenda, our executive director? Where are you, Brenda? Where did she go? Oh, Brenda. And I have to tell you that as a wee fellow traveler, Brenda has been instrumental not just in my career at Hazelden, where I've worked for 24 years, but she's been integral to my journey as well. And Brenda, thank you for all your support personally, and thank you, Brenda, for all your remarkable clinical compassion and passion and expertise, 20-some-odd years working in this field, and whether it's older adults or young teenagers. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. And also to Kim Becker. Where is Kim? Kim Becker. Where? Oh, there she is, of course, over there next to her. Kim. You know, it's a lonely existence. It's a lonely existence when you're sort of the community person, the boots on the ground, hustling to make these connections with Origins and Purpose of Life and all the other sponsors we have here and treatment providers and hospitals and first responders. And Kim, I know you spend a lot of time on the road. And by the way, Interstate 95 has got to be one of the worst parking lots I've ever seen. But Kim, you really do a great job getting around and representing Hazel and Betty Ford, and I thank you so much for carrying the message and helping to make the connections, which are part of the we. Thank you for doing that. And finally, Kelly Geiser. Kelly Geiser is my colleague. I do fundraising 50% of my time at Hazel and Betty Ford. And Kelly, oh, there you are over there, always standing up. Kelly, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Kelly's worked at Hazel and Betty Ford longer than I have, 25 years now, and been passionate about our mission. We're a not-for-profit like a lot of other treatment providers, and we got to raise money if we don't have a margin. We don't have a mission if we don't have a margin, and fundraising is part of that too. Whatever your cause is, make sure you support that cause. Make sure you support that cause. The stakes are high, and so too are the rewards. Is Kim Koslow here? She didn't make it. Kim and I went to high school together. Some of you know Kim anyway. I thought she was going to be here, but she's not here, so she doesn't get your applause. Lastly, before we get to the real reason why you all are here, I would be remiss if I didn't take this moment to recognize the most important person in my life, and I've had a long life, Nell Hurley. You know, I began my journey in recovery 30 years ago this August when I stumbled out of a crack house in Harlem, New York, and was locked up in a psychiatric ward in New York City. They didn't know what to do with me, and they sent me to Hazelden, and there my journey began in 1989. Though I have not been sober that whole time, I had been in recovery, striding for recovery a day at a time. And ever since I came out of that crack house in 1989, I've had a most satisfying life. A good life. But, like everybody else here today, that's part of the we. I've had to learn to live my life on life's terms. One day at a time with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Living life on life's terms with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And learning to live life with a chronic illness that is cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient. And for the past decade or so, I've been on a real roller coaster of a heck of a ride. And I've managed to hang on for the last 10 years especially, precisely because of the we, the community of recovery that allows me to walk my walk as a man committed to long-term recovery. And for the past decade, nobody has been walking this walk every step of the way with me more than Nell Hurley, who is not only my wife, but is also the National Director of Programs and Operations for the Phoenix, of which you're about to hear a lot more about. Thank you, Nell. I love you so much. And thank you, Susan Hurley Bennett, her aunt, who happened to come and be part of this today, too. Addiction is a family disease, and recovery is a family opportunity. So thank you for being here, Susan. Beacons of hope, shining the bright light of hope and help and healing across the audience throughout this auditorium today, just like they shine it through all the places that you come from, close to home and across the nation. Today we have 5 speakers and 3 award recipients. Each is a shining example of the antidote to substance use disorders, the collective power of the community of we. And we are in for a real treat this afternoon, so let's do it. The bios of our speakers are in your very impressive program. I'm not sure who was responsible for the program, but it is very, very good. I'm not going to spend time today introducing our speakers with what you'll find in the program because they're in the program. But I must make the transition between speaker and speaker, and so I will start out today by telling you that Andrew Berkey knows firsthand what it means to recover his purpose. He has turned his personal journey into a purpose-driven life to help others as the founder of Life of Purpose Treatment. Along the way, Andrew has also achieved his master's in social work from none other than FAU. Help me to welcome to the podium Andrew Berkey.
Wait, 1 second. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Berkey. I'm the Director of Public Policy for CityLine Behavioral Health and the founder of Life of Purpose, a group of primary and extended care, purpose model, adolescent, and young adult treatment centers. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is that I haven't found it necessary to take a drink or a drug for over 17 years now. Thank you, thank you. I'm the product of recovery, and I'm the product of treatment. Treatment, we've all heard that word, but what does it mean? We use the word treatment in relation to substance use disorders because we're treating a disease, a chronic disease, a terminal disease, a disease so rampant in our society that when we look back through the lens of time, it'll be viewed as a plague. If you had cancer, you would get treatment to try to kill the cancer cells in your body. If you had diabetes, you would get treatment to try to keep your blood sugar as close to normal as possible. And if you talked about it, even with a complete stranger, there would be no stigma or shame associated with your disease. Others might feel sympathy or perhaps even empathy, but they wouldn't judge you and they wouldn't think less of you as a person. To the contrary, they'd tell you to keep fighting it. They'd tell you to beat it. But what if you had a substance use disorder? First, let's start with what we're treating. When it comes to substance use disorder, the important thing to keep in mind is that we're treating the human brain. Calling the human brain more complex than other organs is like saying that candles and the sun both produce light. Our brains, so far, are the only objects in all of human history that are aware of their own existence. With this in mind, it's not terribly surprising that the treatment of substance use disorders is incredibly complex, multidisciplinary, and extremely difficult, and often takes more than one treatment episode to achieve successful recovery. It took 3 episodes for myself. The other thing, and this is a big one, substance use disorder is one of the most cunning, baffling, difficult to initially spot, and frustrating diseases for both the patient and their loved ones. First off, we do a terrible job of screening for substance use disorder in this country. By the time we catch it, it's typically at stage 4. We don't catch substance use disorder at stage 1 and stage 2 the way that we do with cancer. We only seek treatment when it's absolutely unbearable or we're unbearable for everyone around us. Beyond that, because the diseased organ is also the organ in charge of making decisions, our decision-making ability is completely and utterly compromised during active and recent use. Our brains have been hijacked so badly that we often still want to use substances even when it's obvious that we are dying as a direct result of our substance use. This, of course, drives everyone around us completely insane while they're trying to help us. You know, I didn't have a neurotic mother when I was growing up, but I definitely had one at the end of 3 treatment episodes and my first couple years of recovery, because that's how long it took for my mother and my family system to get back to a place of dealing with normal family problems that didn't involve SWAT teams and multiple emergency room visits. Now, I know most of you have heard all the cliches about moments of willingness, about being sick and tired of being sick and tired, about using them as a catalyst for change when one of us is willing to actually accept help and go to treatment. They're true for a very small percentage of actual adults with substance use disorders. We love them, though, because they sound so good. We love to talk about pivotal moments that shift the entire trajectory of our lives because they're miraculous. But that's not actually how most people get to treatment. We almost always are coerced in one fashion or another. Because, like I said, our brains aren't functioning properly by the time we need treatment. It's almost always pressure from parents or the courts or people that care about us or environmental pressures like homelessness. My miracle came in the form of a gritty mom who relentlessly pushed me to getting help and then stuck it out until I actually got better. That's how we actually go to treatment. And unfortunately, that's why so many of us die without getting the chance to truly experience what recovery has to offer. Here's what you need to understand about treatment of substance use disorders. Treatment works. And treatment doesn't just treat substance use disorders, treatment treats all of the symptomatic problems that are associated with substance use disorders and co-occurring mental health concerns. Are you homeless because of your co-occurring substance use disorders and mental health concerns? Treatment immediately resolves that issue. Are you malnourished because you're spending your very limited resources on drugs instead of food? Treatment resolves that issue as well. Are the physical withdrawal symptoms so horrific that you would rather continue using than face them? Treatment, medical detox, appropriately applied medication-assisted treatment in a safe, controlled, supportive environment, it resolves that issue as well. And the list goes on and on. You immediately get increased access to medical care. You immediately decrease your risk of death, either accidental or intentional. You immediately get access to clinical support and therapy. You immediately get access to friends and peer support. Treatment works, and the United States has the best treatment in the world. People come from all over to seek treatment here. So if high-quality treatment isn't the critical issue in our country, then what is? Access to treatment. What we have an issue with is access to treatment, and even more specifically, equitable access to treatment. And the inability to access care is unquestionably fueling the worst public health crisis our nation has ever faced. Let me say that again. Inability to access care is unquestionably fueling the worst public health crisis that our nation has ever faced. And I'm not just talking about inability to access inpatient treatment on the front end. I'm talking about every step of the way along a full continuum of care. Access to safe housing, access to support professionals, access to recovery community organizations, access to recovery-friendly employment and education, access to temperance training. These are all critical factors in a successful recovery episode. And access to the social safety nets that we have in place for so many other chronic diseases does not exist as it pertains to the full continuum of care with substance use disorder. So obviously, if it's incredibly difficult to make it with support, we're definitely not going to make it without support. And you know what absolutely enrages me about the stigma surrounding treatment of those of us with substance use disorders? We get punishment instead of treatment for a chronic, progressive, fatal disease. We get punished because we're taught from childhood that those of us with substance use disorders deserve that punishment. Not because we're sick people, because society tells us that we're bad people. What's wrong with our society when over 50% of our federal prison population is incarcerated in horrific conditions for substance use disorder instead of receiving the treatment that they desperately need? What's wrong with our society when we have human rights organizations classifying the over 200,000 individuals being sexually assaulted each year in the US prison system as torture, but our society uses those same sexual assaults as the punchline to pop culture jokes about people with substance use disorders dropping the soap in jail after getting arrested for substance use. 200,000, I might add, is just the number of individuals. The number of incidences is well over 1 million. And what's wrong with our society when it's so commonly accepted that people with substance use disorder get what they deserve, that it's the only acceptable circumstance for an adult in a scared straight program in a public school to threaten a child with a future of incarceration in an environment where they will repeatedly be sexually assaulted as a punishment for developing that substance use disorder. People don't have inequitable access to treatment because we don't know how to treat people with substance use disorders. People have inequitable access to treatment because over a half a century after we officially recognized substance use disorder as a disease, we are still bought into the ever-perpetuated lie that people with substance use disorders are bad people. Maybe not even people at all. And because we're not dealing with real people, good people, we're willing to pay to make them suffer, but we won't pay to help them get well, no matter how big the scale of the problem gets. And let's talk about the scale of the problem. We have a tendency to use extremely siloed thinking when we're talking about this issue. We like to break off little pieces and call them a crisis. But the crisis is much broader and deeper than our current media flurry about opioid deaths and opioid statistics. Last year, we did officially report 72,000 overdose deaths, predominantly driven by the opioid crisis. But we don't like to talk about the 88,000 deaths that are attributed to alcohol. We don't like to talk about the 480,000 deaths attributed to tobacco. We don't like to talk about the 45,000 deaths that are attributed to treatable mental health concerns in the form of suicide. And we really don't like to talk about all the little brain diseases that are only killing 10,000 of us a year, like treatable eating disorders. So what we're really talking about is 750,000 people per year dying in this country as a result of substance use disorders and co-occurring mental health concerns. That's half the population of the county that we're currently in. Not the city of Boca, Palm Beach County, all the cities in Palm Beach. It's half the population of this county. These are mass grave numbers. These are genocide numbers. That's the loss of loved ones. Beautiful, wonderful, valuable lives cut short by our society's apathy as much as by the substances that actually killed them. On the economic impact side, we're now north of $1 trillion, that's $1,000 billion, per year in costs due to substance use disorder and mental health concerns. If we calculate out the lost potential lifetime earnings of every single one of us that dies from substance use disorders and mental health concerns, the economic impact is now measured in trillions, still with a T, but now plural with an S. So where do we go from here? Treatment isn't just about getting people well. Treatment's about so much more. It's about fighting for equitable access to care. It's about a 360-degree comprehensive continuum of care. It's about recovery-ready communities. It's about purpose. It's about peer support. It's about stigma reduction. It's about warm handoffs instead of cold bodies. It's about rebuilding lives. It's about restoring hope. It's absolutely critical that we turn the tide on this crisis, whether it's through tax credits like those proposed in Plan A, or shifting to a values-based care insurance reimbursement model and closing the gaps on parity. There are things we can do that will make a real substantive difference. These aren't partisan issues, these are human issues that affect all of us. We need increased access, and we need it now. For every step of progress we've made up until this point, we're still dying out there. And I patently reject the notion that we can't afford to save lives. We can save lives right now, today, and every life that's saved matters. What we can't afford any longer is to turn our heads and ignore the problem. People fought for me more than once and saved my life. People fought for some of you, for your loved ones. We know that each and every one of us with a substance use disorder is a fight worth winning. It's a life worth saving, however many tries it takes. I believe in a future where we fight with all we have for every single person afflicted with a substance use disorder, and I believe in that future because that's how hard treatment fought for me. This is the United States of America. We can do better than this. We are better than this. We will never settle for the soft bigotry of low expectations and accept the morally reprehensible notion that some of us aren't worth saving. We can and will turn this tide, no matter how long it takes. Thank you.
Way to go, man. I'm ready to march in the streets. How about you? By the way, Mark and Julie Cantor, nice to see you guys. Thanks for everything. You had to leave us in the Northeast to come and live in Florida, right? Oh, well, Florida's better off. Florida's better. 7 months you've been down here?
Yeah, but I was in Minnesota last weekend.
I know.
And it snowed, it was so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, come home with us then, and then you won't see it so beautiful. Oh, boy, you guys are so lucky to have Andrew in this community right here leading that charge. Woo! By the way, I want to enlist the three of you at the break to make sure that when the intermission is over, that you get all those people out there and get them back in here, okay? Can I count on you? Okay, I'll give you extra credits next year. So our next speaker is Susan Cheever, and Susan Cheever's bio is in your program, but I want to say something that's not in your program. She is an acclaimed author of 16 or 18 books. It's hard to keep track anymore. But I don't think that's really why she's here, an accomplished author of 16 or 18 books. Because I believe, and I know I'm biased, that Susan Cheever is perhaps the most influential and important writer of the last 50 years on the subject that brings all of us into this room today. Her biography of Bill Wilson has had a profound impact on my journey and on my own writing. I believe that her biography of Bill Wilson should be required reading for anyone who wants to understand recovery in the context of our own shortcomings. Help me to welcome Susan Cheever.
Hi, I'm Susan Cheever, and I have 26 years of sobriety. It took me a couple of tries. I went to my first meeting in 1975, so you can do the math. So I'm just going to share a couple of highlights of those years with you, a conclusion that I've come to and a story that I have to tell. But first I'm going to tell a joke, because I love jokes. So a rabbi, a priest, and a minister are all standing around, and they're asked what they want said about them after they're dead when they're lying in their coffins. And the rabbi says, well, I want them to say he was a man of community, he was a man of family, when you were with him you felt included, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the priest says, well, what I want them to say about me when I'm lying there in my coffin is he was a man of God, he had a direct relationship with the higher power, and when you were with him, you really felt in the presence of somebody who was communicating with God. And the minister says, I want them to say, wait, I think he's moving. So that's a joke about bringing people back to life, which is what we're doing here today, both literally and figuratively. And the main thing that I want to leave you with today, and I'll come back to it at the end, is that we talk a lot about addiction being a family disease and alcoholism being a family disease, and indeed they are. But I also think that recovery runs in families. My father got sober, and without that, who knows, right? But then I got sober, I have a child in recovery. I think when one person goes into recovery, it has an incredible impact on everyone around them, especially people who are intimate with them. So I'm a writer, as William said, and I, in the year 2000, I write for whoever wants me to write for them, pretty much. In the year 2000, Time magazine decided to do Most Important People of the 20th Century. So they asked me to do the profile of Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I thought, okay, this is going to be easy. There'll be 5 full-dress biographies, and I'll just boil them down. So I was amazed to find that there wasn't even one full-dress biography. There were a lot of wonderful books by his friends, there's Pass It On, which was written anonymously by committee, but there was no real biography. So after some backing and forthing, I decided that I would write that biography. And I have to say, writing a biography of Bill Wilson was certainly one of the greatest adventures of my life. As you will hear, Bill Wilson was not a good candidate for a man to start a movement which has saved millions of lives and changed millions of families. He was very often depressed. He was a skinny little guy who ended up as a chain smoker, which killed him. He grew up in the hardscrabble town of East Dorset, Vermont, as a quarryman's son. So attractive was he that both his parents took off when he was 11 years old, dumping him with his grandfather, who had just lost a child, so it wasn't such a cheerful household. The stars were not in alignment for Bill Wilson, yet there were a few things about him which, when you look back, almost look like a blueprint, right, for Alcoholics Anonymous. So he went to school in Vermont when Vermont was a dry state. And they taught temperance in the schools, and they had temperance clubs. So he got to see as a teenager what worked and what didn't work when it came to staying sober. And he also, in Vermont at that time, it was a very grassroots democracy. The towns were run on a monthly town meeting, and it was one person, one vote. And that's also what he passed on to Alcoholics Anonymous. But of course, the main thing that qualified Bill Wilson to be the man who invented Alcoholics Anonymous with Dr. Bob Smith is that he had a terrible drinking problem. And he knew that drinking was a terrible thing, and he decided he would never, ever drink, like many alcoholics. And then, of course, the time came when, just the right drink was right there, and he drank it. And he started drinking, and he was really an ugly one. He was the kind of drunk who would go to play golf and disappear for 3 days. And you'd find him 3 blocks away with his forehead cut open. In the family Bible that he shared with his wife, every year he's promising not to drink anymore. I mean, he really couldn't make any headway against his own alcoholism. And slowly, and I mean slowly, over at least a decade, he tried everything. He tried the Catholic Church, he tried the Christian Church, he tried the Oxford group, he tried Towns Hospital, he tried everything he could find. And slowly he began to piece together a toolkit, let's call it, that became the tools that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's just miraculous that happened. So I'm just going to tell you one story from doing the research for the book. There are 3 Bill Wilson archives. There's one in New York at General Services Office. There's one in Vermont. And there's one, the biggest one is in Bedford Hills, New York, outside of New York City, where Bill and his wife Lois lived for the last 30 years of Bill's life. And when Bill Wilson died, Lois built a kind of matching house to their gray shingle house, and she put everything in there. And then she hired a caretaker who lives there. And when I came along in about 2003, everything was just piled up in this room. And nobody had really indexed this archive. Nobody had really been through this archive. So that's what biographers love. Right? So I would sit there at this big table, and the archivist, whose job was to index everything in there, would hand me things, boxes and folders and whatever. So one day she hands me these 4 rectangular green notebooks. And I see that they're the nurse's logs for the last 3 months of Bill Wilson's life. He was dying of lung disease, as I mentioned. And there were 2 male nurses, and every hour, one or the other of them would make a notation, right? Who visited, what Bill said, what his mood was. He was on oxygen, when they gave him oxygen, when he wanted oxygen and they didn't give him oxygen, when his wife came. Everything was in these logs. So I'm flipping through these logs, and I get to the middle of December, and it says, patient demands a glass of whiskey. And I sat there at this table, and my blood ran cold. I mean, here was a man who invented Alcoholics Anonymous, who had been sober for 35 years, demanding a glass of whiskey. And it was quite a moment. I made a noise, and the archivist said, I thought that would interest you, right? And I just went, how can this be? How can this be? And, I thought about it. It happened 3 times on his deathbed that he asked for a glass of whiskey. He didn't get one. But it really, for me, was evidence of the soul-crushing power of the disease of alcoholism. I mean, Bill Wilson, 35 years. And also, whatever, you know what I'm going to say about that. But anyway, and also it was evidence for me of the incredible spiritual force that keeps me from having a drink a day at a time, and that kept him from having a drink a day at a time for all those 35 years. So that was an amazing moment, although there were many amazing moments in writing that book. So in conclusion, I just want to come back to what I was saying before about recovery running in families. I guess I can't say it's contagious, but I sort of think it is. And I think that it's important to remember, or it's important for me to remember, that if one person gets sober, it has a huge effect on everyone they deal with, on everyone around them, and on everyone with whom they are intimate. It is like throwing a rock into a pond. And, it's one of the many principles of AA is really, there's a service principle, but there's also a you have to be sober to make it work principle. It's up to you. And so I would say, or what I want to say in invoking how much Bill Wilson, with all his humanity, helped millions of people, that each of us can also help many, many people by coming into recovery. I can do it, and so can you. Thanks.
Question for you. Thank you, Susan. You were so good that you actually finished 1 minute and 50 seconds before you needed to. So I'm going to ask a quick question. We're going to have a formal Q&A later on, but do you think Lois Wilson will ever get the acclaim and the recognition that Bill W. has? And if not, or if so, why or why not?
So this is a question about Lois Wilson. Will she ever get the acclaim that Bill got? Of course she won't get the acclaim that Bill got, but I would love to see her get more acclaim. She was a rock for him, and after he died in 1971, she spent about 20 years making sure that his legacy would be there at Stepping Stones. And I have to say, she also corresponded with my father, asking him if he wanted to write a biography of Bill Wilson. I didn't know this till much later, and he said, no thanks.
Good job.
But in her bookcase, I found a book of mine, which was so sweet. So she was an extraordinary woman, and we don't know what, if every marriage is based on a deal, we don't know what their deal was. And can I keep answering this question? When the book came out, there we go, 38, 37. When the book came out, there was a lot of talk about Bill Wilson's marital infidelities, and the point that I kept making over and over again was that we don't know. We don't know what they said to each other. We don't know how that unfolded within the marriage. So I hope that someday Lois gets more of the acclaim that she deserves for everything she did for Bill, and also after Bill died.
Susan Jeever. I'm coming back, I promise. Here I am. As we know, recovery requires personal responsibility, a willingness to move from the problem of our using substances to the solution of not using substances and becoming responsible, contributing members of society. We don't do this all by ourselves. Part of the we is professionals who take their personal passion and their professional expertise and turn it all into an infrastructure of support to help people overcome their struggle with substance use disorders. Today, we honor Ariano Ciancio with an Achievement in Advocacy Award. Ariano is the service population advocate for the Delray Beach Police Department, who has been tireless in helping people who have overdosed to get the services they need and deserve to stop using and also to start living their lives productively one day at a time. Please help me to recognize with your round of applause Ariano Ciancio with an Advocacy Award. In a few minutes, we're going to take our intermission, but we have another remarkable speaker between now and then. I've only had the opportunity to meet Dr. Heather Howard one time, last night. And last night, I got an opportunity not just to meet her, but to hear some of her story, as you will now. Wow. Without a doubt, Dr. Howard has harnessed the power of her personal experience with her clinical and academic expertise and put it all into an impressive ability to unmask the stigma of addiction and to promote the power and possibility of healing that comes from recovery. Dr. Heather Howard has come all the way from here, where she is an assistant professor in the Sandler School for Social Work. Help me to welcome Dr. Heather Howard.
Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone in the audience. I'm just so impressed that you're here on a beautiful afternoon in Boca Raton, and your participation is so important, being here and learning, and you're going to continue to spread what you hear today to your circle, and it was just going to grow to eliminate stigma. So thank you so much. I'm a clinical researcher here, about a year and a half in South Florida, but I'm not going to share my current research right now. I want to, and you're probably saying, oh, thank goodness, right? I'm going to share some stories, personal and professional and academic, of 3 influential women in my life that have taught me and I've learned from and grown from. And really, they are very different, but they have a connection. They all had battled with opioids. And the 3 areas are women's health empowerment, healing, and sobriety, and how that's possible. So my exposure actually to opioids started as a little person. I was very young in 1976, and my mother was diagnosed with systemic lupus. If anyone knows about lupus, it's a very debilitating chronic disease, and many days it's very difficult to get out of bed. And at the time, which isn't very different from the turn of the century, chronic pain in women's health was managed with not prescription opioids, but morphine. And my mother was given a prescription for liquid morphine. And this morphine was different, I knew as a younger person, than the other medications because it was locked in the basement, it was kept away, and it was through injections. So what I really saw a transformation of a vivacious, confident, outgoing woman that loved life to someone that her personality was changing. And it really was, if you will, kind of this mask of morphine. And there was fear and anxiety and anger. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew as a young person, young children notice differences. And one time, I vividly remember coming home from school. I was in elementary school, and I could hear the crying and the screaming from outside. And I went inside, and my mother was on the floor, and she was writhing in pain, and she was just yelling at me, "Heather, help me, Heather, help me." And I was so young, I was too young to pick her up and help her. And I didn't know it at the time, but she was actually going through very painful withdrawal alone. Support is everything. Support is everything. So that propelled me, like so many of us. Sometimes what we decide in our adulthood is so much of our lived experiences, and that really propelled me. After college, I wanted to do helping profession. I had started in pre-medicine, but it just wasn't close enough. I'm a very relational person, so I chose to get my master's in social work at Boston College, and I really, though, wanted to work in healthcare systems. I wanted to empower women, especially, and how to work through chronic pain in non-pharmacological ways, and how to address, most importantly, trauma. Because as you probably know, both men and women, but especially women, up to 90% with substance use have experienced horrific trauma, childhood sexual abuse, violence, and in sometimes current violent relationships. Very, very difficult. So I had the privilege and honor over 20 years working with women in a healthcare setting, a Brown University-affiliated hospital, and just learned so much. The turn of the century, guess what was happening? Prescription opioids. And I knew it as a child that maybe this wasn't a good idea for chronic pain in what I witnessed and what I saw. And then I was seeing patient after patient. It maybe began with, as an adolescent, with wisdom teeth removal and prescribed opioids, or maybe a knee surgery, prescribed opioids, and then that evolved into misuse and sometimes an opioid use disorder. What was happening was also women of childbearing age, which is the most highly prescribed demographic of prescription opioids, was having these decisional conflicts around what treatment should I do, what can I do now that I'm pregnant? Well, there weren't a lot of answers at the turn of the century. One particular woman, Lucia, who I was working with, and she was really in a quagmire because she had had one child 6 years previously. She was on medication-assisted treatment, and the infant had substance exposure, and the infant had neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is a treatable syndrome. However, the experience for her was really horrific because she experienced a lot of stigma and a lot of judgment. There wasn't really a lot of practice and policy initiatives back then around the care for NAS. And she said, Heather, I just don't want to go through that again with this pregnancy. I really want to would taper off the methadone and have opioid free for the delivery. So I talked to my team, and they really were uncomfortable with that decision, and they decided that they wouldn't support that. So this woman decided, she was a very strong self-advocate, that that's what she wanted. So she went across state lines, and she went to another state that supported that decision. But it took many, many weeks of really advocating with her provider, the methadone provider, to say that she really wanted to taper. Before she had left, we had had a relationship, so I asked her if I could call her in her postpartum period, and she said that would be fine. And I did, and she said, I was able to taper off the methadone in the 3rd trimester. My infant didn't have neonatal abstinence syndrome. That's wonderful. How are you doing now? She said, I'm doing great. I'm going to recovery support groups. I see my therapist periodically. I'm doing great with the baby. And she was in a good place. How was your delivery and immediate postpartum period, I asked her. And she said it was great, except 2 nurses had read through my chart and had read that she was on methadone in her 1st and 2nd trimester. And she said they really judged me for that. And they said, why were you on methadone while you were pregnant? So the social justice social worker in me said, this is so unacceptable that we're continuing to judge women in healthcare decisions, and now it's 2005, 2006. So another woman propelled me to go back to school, and that was Lucia. And I decided to really scientifically investigate what is this lived experience and what's happening for women that have a substance use disorder, and then particularly opioids, and then subsequently become pregnant. So from one of the studies that I conducted, there was this remarkable revelation from the qualitative data. It was support. Of the 20 women that I had interviewed, 2 of them had received support. Now, mind you, all of them had they had internal stigma and received external stigma, but 2 had received support. One was from a nurse in the NICU, and one was from an OB, different states. The woman that said that it was the nurse said if it wasn't for that nurse, I wouldn't have entered treatment. Later, I said, I have to find this nurse because she was at my hospital. And I found her of 1,000 nurses in this hospital. I asked for the nice Kelly. And I said, Kelly, how do you practice, your maternal nurse practice? And she said, I just treat everybody the same. And I said, keep doing that because it's working. And then this revelation, how is this construct of support, that support for autonomy, support that you can believe in someone, that they can do that, support that they have the confidence for change, how is this mediating variable that really is this catalyst for people asking for help? Because the flip side of it, we know that stigma is disinhibiting, and that's what creates this space where we're afraid to ask for help. We know in some shame theory, Dr. Nathanson talks about shame coping strategies, right? They're not healthy, and many times they're managed through alcohol and substance use. Shame is really the root of alcohol and substance use. It's a self-loathing and it's a self-hatred. And sometimes we withdraw, sometimes we attack ourselves, sometimes we attack others. Dr. Brené Brown talks about shame resilience. There's actually hope in that we can move through shame. We can connect with others, receive empathy, and give empathy after we deconstruct these feelings of shame. I really want to end with the third person, Christina. And what's really important to me is practice-informed research and research-informed practice. And I said, I really want to try this support intervention and see what happens. So before I moved to Florida, this was really one of my last patients, and I met her after DCF became involved, and she was told that her infant was going to be removed due to a history of substance use and a history of DCF involvement. And she had intergenerational trauma, and she actually had been removed that she remembered very vividly at age 4 from her home. There was a history of parental substance use. And believe me, she didn't want to meet with me, another clinical social worker. As I sat with her on the bench before she was exiting, she said, I just want to make sure that my infant is going to be okay, because her infant was going to be leaving the hospital with a non-kinship foster parent. She said, I'm my mother. I am my mother. I'm doing the same thing. And I said, you're not your mother. And your story is going to be a different story. I asked her if she had any food in the house. I've never asked that in a clinical assessment. But she had a C-section. She was relying on public transportation, and she couldn't name one person that was her support. So I went to a nearby grocery store and picked up a bag full of groceries for $10 and put them in the bush by her apartment. And when Christina arrived home, there was a bag of groceries. And I know she didn't think that I was going to drop off the groceries, and I had never done that in 23 years of clinical practice ever. And the next day when I spoke with her, she said thank you. And then she accepted a referral from me of a home-based service called Healthy Families America, which really focuses on infant mental health. It's a great program. Needless to say, Christina started believing that maybe she wasn't damaged goods. And she started trying new things, and she started accepting help. And 6 months later, her infant was reunited with her. And today, as we still stay in touch periodically, her infant's almost 3. She's an online honors student, psychology major, with a 4.0. So that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. So Shirley and Lucia and Christina are such brave women. And were at times really felt probably that there was no hope. But support is everything. Support is truly everything. Thank you so much.
Dr. Heather Howard, thank you. So we have a minute here. I want to just ask you, the opioid epidemic really did level the playing field, and it got everybody to finally wake up to the realities of substance use disorders and how they manifest themselves. How has the School of Social Work here and social workers in general, how have they had to adapt to the reality, not just of the opioid epidemic, but the fact that addiction is rampant in what they do in terms of the clients they help?
Sure, great question. And, not only for social work, I'm a real proponent for nursing and medicine to have classes or full courses in addiction and treatment. We're actually going to be starting a program at our school, so to be certified in substance use treatment, which is really, really exciting. But we really make it a priority. We have several electives, and we have, in my course, we have several classes around treatment engagement and prevention and intervention. So I appreciate you asking that.
Thank you, Dr. Heather Howard. Oh, here you go. How are we? We are good. Woo! Okay, so we're going to take a little intermission now. By the way, I have to do a public service announcement. Today we go on daylight savings time or go off of it. What is it? I don't know, but just remember to do what you're supposed to do tonight. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute intervention here, or interruption here. Or you do a 10-minute intervention too if anyone needs one. But I want everybody to really pay attention to coming back into your seats in 9 minutes so we can start in 10 minutes. Is that a deal? We'll see you in 9 minutes. Okay. So we're more than halfway through the program. We have 2 awards and 2 speakers left, and then we're going to have a little Q&A. If you have any questions or comments that you want to offer, write them down or think about them, and we're going to have the panelists or the speakers up here in chairs, and we're going to have microphones, and so you can ask your question, and we can continue to have a dialogue for about a half an hour until we wrap it up on time. I think it's at 5:30. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Remember what I said earlier about the power of we? It's much more than just us. It requires community leaders and advocates and policymakers and concerned citizens. People like our next recipient of an Achievement in Advocacy Award, an award that we give proudly today to Terrell Pyburn, the city attorney for the city of Coconut Creek, who worked for the city of Delray Beach and whose expertise in public policy, expertise in legislation, along with her passion to help people, all of those things she's brought together in an effective, profound way to raise the standards to protect people in early recovery living in sober or recovery residences in this community. And also, and do not underestimate the power of this component of her efforts, she's also led the effort to crack down on people and businesses that took advantage of vulnerable people. In other words, what she has done is to provide those vulnerable people early in recovery struggling with substance use disorders. What Terrell has done is to give dignity and respect to people who deserve it. Help me to recognize Terrell Pyburn.
I just want to say thank you. I do not deserve this recognition. All of you deserve this recognition for all the time that you have put in. I am, however, grateful for the opportunity to serve all of you because it really just, I think substance use disorder has impacted everyone. And I have viewed it as my life's mission to do what I can to try to make sure that those who are trying to get treatment, who are trying to get help, are able to get the help they need without being exploited and without being taken advantage of. So I thank you very much for this award.
Thank you, Paul, so much. Thank you. I feel like I'm winning an award by giving out these awards. It's kind of cool. I knew of Scott Strode long before I met him for the first time last night. How could I not know about Scott Strode? My wife, Nell, is the national director of the Phoenix. Scott is the founder and the executive director of this not-for-profit, whose personal vision has now touched the lives of thousands of people who have discovered the power of recovery in sober, active communities across this nation. Help me to welcome Scott Strode.
I couldn't have imagined that the most painful part of my life would lead me to the most meaningful part of my life. I guess it's really not a surprise. Pain is a powerful catalyst for change. Countless nonprofits have been started because of an individual's personal struggle. Then they want to help others heal from that same struggle. Pain is actually so powerful that it started revolutions. But over the years, I've had the blessing to be able to see thousands of people tap into the resiliency of the human spirit. And what I've now come to believe is that pain actually isn't the most powerful catalyst. Hope is. Hope of a better life. Today, I want to talk about both those things, both pain and hope. So I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania with my brother and sister. My mom and dad divorced when I was young, and we spent every other weekend with my father on his farm. That time that my brother and sister and I shared playing in the woods, fields, and streams of Pennsylvania, and playing behind my mom's home in a small neighborhood in Pennsylvania, are some of the most meaningful moments of my childhood. But not all of my childhood was nurturing. I struggle with a learning disability. And in those days, I was made to feel stupid because my mind didn't work the same way as other kids. My mom and dad each remarried and then divorced again. And my father had his own challenges. His father left him when he was young, and he carried that pain with him and passed it to us. He struggled with mental illness, so we never really knew which dad was going to show up that day, so we were always on edge as kids. His anger was scary. He was my size at that time, and when he would get mad, there was always a threat of physical abuse. He was emotionally abusive, and he would belittle us and shame us in public. That was really hard for my siblings and I. When my mom remarried, it introduced alcoholism into the family. A family outing on a Sunday was all piling in the station wagon and driving across the state line to Maryland to buy a handle of vodka because they didn't sell booze in Pennsylvania on Sundays. And a family picnic really wasn't a party until somebody went to the hospital for something alcohol-related. On top of that, and in spite of that, there was an expectation of being perfect. And we were always reminded when we'd fall short of that impossible goal. My mom did her best to insulate us from these things when we were kids, but it still had a profound effect on me. See, I believe that those childhood experiences, both positive and negative, start to forge the lens that we see the world through. And those early childhood traumas tint that lens ever so slightly that we don't even notice we're seeing through that. We make our decisions based on those experiences. And for those of us who have a lot of those traumas, what ends up happening often is we have trouble finding our emotional well-being internally. We're left looking for it outside of ourselves. Sometimes it's how much money do you make, or what do you look like, or did you achieve those goals you put out there in life? Sometimes we just numb it out with drinking or drugging and try to make that go away. Those things, those adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are something I encourage all of you to learn more about. I would look that up. The ACE study was amazing. I think it was like 70,000 people or something they studied, in kind of middle income bracket. So it wasn't even folks that had other struggles that they were trying to overcome. But on the ACE score, I did my own ACE score, I'm about a 6. And according to that, the likelihood that I will die almost 20 years earlier than somebody who hasn't experienced ACEs goes way up. I'm more susceptible to depression, suicidality, substance use disorder, and chronic disease in general. I don't believe that my fate is sealed. I think I can change that life path. The challenge with ACEs, though, is they're often passed from generation to generation. There's a quote out there that says, pain is handed down from generation to generation until somebody decides they're willing to feel it. I wasn't ready to feel it yet. I was just 11 years old. So I picked up a drink for the first time at 11. By 15 years old, I was using cocaine, I was depressed, and I was suicidal. I drank and I drugged my way through life until I was 24, living in Boston. And then, coming up on 22 years ago, I got sober there in Boston. I got into a boxing gym, and there was something special about getting in the ring for the first time. It gave me a different confidence that I didn't have before. Somebody introduced me to climbing and triathlon and running 5Ks, and I eventually ran the Boston Marathon. And every time I crossed the finish line, I stood a little taller, and I started to think that maybe the lessons I was taught as a kid weren't true. The really special thing about that time in my life was the group of people that I had surrounded myself with. I had built a new tribe, a new group of friends that would rather get up at 5 in the morning to go ice climbing than stay up till 5 in the morning drinking and drugging and doing what I used to do. So we had all sorts of adventures, and one day I said to him, I was like, hey, what do you think about the idea of us starting a nonprofit that does this for other people? They said, that's great, you should go ahead and do it, and good luck. But they started to realize that I was serious, and many of them got engaged in helping. I had friends that were climbing partners and friends that had been clinical social workers. We came together, we started a nonprofit, and we decided to call it the Phoenix, because I believe we're all rising from the ashes of something. Phoenix is a really simple model. You only have to be 48 hours clean and sober to come to one of our programs. You have to adhere to a code of conduct that is designed to create a trauma healing environment. So essentially, anything that isn't nurturing isn't welcome at a Phoenix event. People show up at this event, and the first thing they say is it really free? And I say, yeah, it is. And then the second thing they said, totally free. And I say, yeah. But we have peer instructors, and many of our folks have walked the same path as the person walking through the door. So we go with them into the gym or into the climbing gym or into the yoga class, and we turn them onto a sport that meant a lot to us in our own recovery journey. And it's amazing to see what happens. At those workouts, When everybody's done and everybody's laying in a puddle of sweat on the floor afterward, and they reach out and they just do that little fist bump, Phoenix just happened in that moment. That person started to think of themselves as more than just their aces, more than just their addiction story, and maybe for the first time in their life, they start to develop this positive identity. The thing about the Phoenix, though, is we don't really want to think of it as an organization. We're trying to think of it as a movement. This idea that if you need it, and you need your new tribe, and you need that support, that you could start something like Phoenix. We're doing our best to scale the program all over the country. In the last 12 years, we've gone from 3 states to over 22 states. And we're now in over 40 communities nationally. But more than that, we're taking the opportunity to mentor any other program that comes up that's like the Phoenix. Because we can't be everywhere, and we need folks in communities around the country to start their own programs. That kind of brings me to my next part of the talk, which is about this business term that you may have heard called creative destruction. This idea that what we create today will be so much better than what we had yesterday that we will transform the landscape. A good example of creative destruction is cell phones to payphones, right? Laptops to typewriters. We haven't had that kind of evolution in the recovery support space for a long time. It's time for it now. But it's going to take all of us. It's going to take innovative ideas, us thinking about things differently. So that brings me to a call to action, something that all of you can help with. The first thing is, if we know ACEs exist, we have to also believe that there's the opposite. There's nurturing, there's loving, there's support, there's healthy attachment. Some of us got some of that in childhood, some of us got none of it in childhood. But we can build it now. In all of your relationships, I ask you guys to aspire to bring that loving, nurturing, supportive. Not just your close relationships, but people you interact with on a daily basis, people that you may not even know well. See if you can find a way to be there for them, to support them. Because I guarantee if you do that, you're going to get that same energy back. More importantly than that is to be able to find love and compassion, not for others, but for ourselves. Right? We're all perfectly imperfect, just as we are. Pia Melody says that, and I love that. We're all perfectly imperfect, and we can find that love and compassion for ourselves. One of the Phoenix team members said to me, and it sticks with me, Phoenix didn't make me strong. They just reminded me that I am. So let's do that for others in our life, including our own children. The other thing I want to ask, because I know there's people that work in the treatment space out here, is those of you that are doing really good trauma work, I challenge you to think about how to get it outside of your office, how to get it outside the walls of your treatment center. How do we bring trauma healing into the world? Imagine if we could do trauma healing in prisons or in programs for people experiencing homelessness. Imagine if we could reach the 90% of people that never get to access formal treatment, or if we could even do it in high schools. And lastly, I ask you guys to join me in creating this revolution, right? This idea that we're going to do things so differently today that it's going to change the outcome tomorrow for people struggling with substance use disorder. And that's so important because if ACEs pass by generation, imagine the kids growing up under this addiction crisis. Imagine the next wave that's coming. The only way we can brace for that is for all of us to step into that work and form a revolution not born from pain, but born from hope. So we can hold up that light of hope for people that are still in the dark and tell them that recovery is possible and we're here for them. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. I got a quick question for you. My colleague Brenda Eiliff is always reminding me about the role that addiction and recovery play in older adult populations. Sober active community, how does that apply in an older adult population, knowing that we're in a state that has a lot of older adults who either are in recovery or need to be in recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I've learned as I've gotten older as an athlete is just being consistent. You got to move your body consistently. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you just got to move it consistently. So if you're in recovery and you want to organize something like this, get some friends together and do a walk. And maybe you conclude the walk at one of these beautiful vistas overlooking the ocean, and you just have a social event. The folks that can come on the walk, great. If people can go faster, they can jog a little bit. And other folks can just hang out and keep the coffee warm and kind of lead the social part. It's really about coming together. It's not always about the activity, it's about the tribe.
Scott Strode. Thank you, Scott. Woo! Just very quickly, I was remiss earlier. I saw a good friend and fellow traveler who, can somebody take this? Who's been a supporter of us at Hazel and Betty Ford, Steve Waymeyer. I don't know where Stephen is. Oh, there you are, Stephen. Thanks for everything that you've done and are doing for the recovery community at large, and specifically for Hazel and Betty Ford and your role on the council and all the other good things that you've done for us in Naples and beyond. Thank you, Stephen. We're almost there. We have one more honor award that we'd like to give at this time, and it's really done in the spirit of the other two Achievement and Advocacy Awards that we have bestowed today. This one is to Palm Beach County Commissioner Melissa McKinley. You've seen what she's done. You can see it in your program, and I can't do it justice because it's all in there, but I want to tell you, in knowing about her work and reading about her work and talking to people who have seen the results of her work, the real reason why she's getting this award is because of the thousands of lives in Florida, thousands of lives in Florida that she has helped to save. She was the very first, I think, very first public official who recognized the ravages of opioids here in Florida, and was really the one that helped to get the powers that be in the state of Florida to declare the opioid epidemic precisely what it is. And what is it? It is a public health emergency. A lot of people had seen this as something that was to do with criminal justice or ignorant doctors or junkies or pharmacists who didn't care. And it was all of those things, right? But what it really was a public health emergency. And it was through her work that this state became not just ground zero for the problem, but that this state has now become ground zero for the solution. So please help me to welcome Melissa McKinley.
You know, I'm a politician, so we have to take the microphone when we get a chance. I have to tell you, it must just be a coincidence, but yesterday was International Women's Day, and so to be honored with Terrell and Ariana. You know, our previous speaker spoke of his childhood ACE score of being a 6. Well, mine is an 8. But for the grace of God, I stand here before you today. My mother was an alcoholic and a prescription drug abuser who went cold turkey and then decided to go back to school and become an RN, and she was the charge nurse at the local crisis stabilization unit, dealing with mostly adolescents who were homicidal and suicidal and many who were drug addicted. Unfortunately, because of all the physical work that her job entailed, she suffered a degenerative spinal disorder and became addicted to prescription pain medication. I never really thought anything of it until I had my wisdom teeth pulled when I was about 25 years old, which, was just a few weeks ago. And she called and asked if I had any left over. And I didn't think anything of it. Back then, those medications were nothing more than Tylenol or Advil. And the last 7 years of her life, I was not able to say goodbye to her before she died a year and a half ago because oftentimes she wasn't sober enough to hold a conversation. She succumbed to stage 4 lung cancer, but when they found her on the couch with 4 bottles next to her. I'm the friend to a young girl that I knew who lost her husband 2 years ago to a heroin overdose and left her with 2 little babies that we just fought for 2 years to get those children into child care programs so she could go back to work. I've watched friends lose their wives, lose their daughters, lose their sons, and it was really my AIDS daughter's passing that I said, okay, enough is enough. Somebody has to have the political will to stand up to the governor and say, this is nonsense. You need to do something about it. So I think my rather turbulent upbringing gave me one really good thing, a high resiliency score, which is important. But I'm not afraid to, pardon my French, to piss off the right people. And so that's what I have done, and it's through the advocates in this room that you all have stood behind me for the past couple of years to make that happen. And this year, under our new governor, he has recommended the highest dollar amount to combat this epidemic that we have seen probably in more than a decade. So I'm so honored. My birthday was this past week, but I had to be in Tallahassee and in Washington advocating on the sober home bill and other things. But this is a wonderful birthday present. We're trying to change the conversation from people across the nation to stop calling this an opioid epidemic and start calling it what it is. It's a substance use disorder epidemic. So thank you all for letting me spend a few minutes with you today. And thank you so much for this honor, and I can't wait to tell Dave Ehrenberg I got one too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa, for your courage and for being a beacon of hope to people who need and deserve help. Now to our keynote. Her bio is like all the others in your program, but I will tell you just a very quick story at the risk of maybe running over an extra minute or two. I've worked, as I mentioned earlier, for Hazel and Betty Ford, or Hazel and we merged with the Betty Ford Center 4 or 5 years ago, became Hazel and Betty Ford, but I've worked there for 23, 24 years. I've been the public advocate, which means I'm on the outside. I do a lot of work with Kelly and Kim and Brenda and lots of others in Florida and lots of places. I carry the message. I use my own story. I use the experience of my own journey and all the people I meet along the way. I give a lot of speeches. And I was giving a speech about 4 years ago in the only place that I know of that's colder than Minnesota in the winter, and that's Fargo, North Dakota. And like I was doing it as a fundraiser for another treatment center that was doing really good work down in the trenches in Fargo. I got there, like I do, and did a little private reception ahead of time. And I met a couple, stood out right away. I was told that this couple, that the man in the relationship was running for governor of North Dakota. He was the unendorsed candidate, Republican. But he was running, and he was there with his wife, and it was nice to meet them. I run into a lot of people who are running for office or actually who are elected officials, and generally they come and they get their award or they wave their hands and make sure they get seen and they say something and then they disappear. But this couple came, and they stayed for the private reception. They sat down near the front row where Mark and Julie are now roughly and listened to my talk, and they stayed not just for part of my talk, where they could be seen, they stayed for the entire talk. Not only did they stay for the entire 90-minute talk, but they stayed afterwards. Not only did they stay afterwards, but they were literally the last people to leave the Civic Center that night, hours later. And I thought that was very odd. until when we were in the parking lot, your speaker revealed to me where her passion and where their interest came for the subject that brought them to that auditorium that night and brings her here today. Since our first meeting, her husband has been elected governor of North Dakota. I dare say that perhaps there are other opportunities beyond the state of North Dakota for him someday. But in the meantime, his wife has become the First Lady of North Dakota, who is not only using her bully pulpit in North Dakota, but is using her own experiences, as you will shortly hear, to carry the message, to become a beacon of hope, to become an advocate for those who still suffer, and to become part of the we that brings us here today, not just in North Dakota, not just in Florida, but across this nation to wherever people are suffering in silence, secrecy, and shame. Please help me to welcome your keynote speaker, Catherine Burgum.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Burgum. There are two things I never thought I would ever do. One, be First Lady of anything. And two, have the opportunity to share my story with so many people to help break the shame and stigma of addiction. But by some crazy set of circumstances, or maybe by divine intervention, I am both First Lady of North Dakota and am standing in front of you today full of gratitude for the opportunity to be here. The chronic disease of addiction, including the opioid crisis, are some of the biggest challenges facing our nation. While I am not an expert on the disease of addiction, I do have lived experience. I'm in long-term recovery from alcohol addiction with over 17 years of sobriety. Thank you. I spent 15 of those years in silence, keeping my recovery in the closet like a shameful secret. Sadly, only 1 in 10 people who need treatment for addiction actually seek treatment. I know because I was one of those statistics. I knew for years that I needed help, but I didn't seek it because I was ashamed. For people with the disease of addiction, 3 words have deprived them of medical treatment, empathy, and compassion for centuries, or more like decades. And those 3 words are shame, stigma, and discrimination. My journey with addiction started when I was in high school in North Dakota. When I first started drinking, I knew that I didn't drink like others. I experienced my first blackout when I was in high school. I struggled with alcohol-related issues and episodes over the next 20 years of my life. I chose to live and work in cultures with excessive drinking. I had no desire to attend any events that didn't include alcohol, and I couldn't imagine my life without alcohol. While constantly struggling with my addiction, my career progressed, and I had forward movement in my life, but I could never reach my full potential with my addiction holding me back. And there came a time when I knew I needed to stop drinking. But addiction is a powerful disease, and it kept me drinking for many years. I could achieve any goal I set for myself, but I could not stop drinking, even though I experienced many baffling, demoralizing, and defeating drunk episodes. I'd stop drinking for 3 months, and then I would start again. I'd stop for a year, and then I would start drinking again. And this cycle continued over a period of 8 years. I'm so grateful that my higher power kept asking me to pull on my boots
and try again. I finally became willing to do whatever it would take to get sober. And that's when the miracle happened for me, and I started staying sober. I found a program that's built on a foundation of gratitude, helping others, and a higher power, and it saved my life. And I'll forever be grateful to this program and its people for embracing me and helping me find recovery. My openness about my recovery has started what I hope will be a lifetime of advocacy, speaking out for those who have been misrepresented and misunderstood. I'm working to create opportunities for the people, families, and communities devastated by this disease. This unexpected journey has opened doors that are helping me to reduce the barriers, shame, and stigma that I faced during my own recovery journey. My platform to eliminate the stigma of addiction is part of a larger movement in our state called Recovery Reinvented. It is a movement that's bigger than me, it's bigger than the governor, and it's bigger than our behavioral health team. Recovery Reinvented is the sum of all the passionate parts working together. We have held 2 major conferences, much like today's event, to bring education, awareness, and energy to this movement in North Dakota. In fact, William Moyers and his wife, Nell, both spoke at our first Recovery Reinvented. As First Lady, it's my mission to end the shame and stigma of the chronic disease of addiction. Stigma, which is defined as the mark of disgrace, is a persistent barrier to effectively confronting addiction and finding recovery. With addiction, stigma puts up walls instead of building bridges. It is socially constructed, based in fear, and usually contains inaccurate information. I met the parents of a teenage boy who died of an opioid overdose in his car in a high school parking lot. They were devastated by their son's needless death. However, there was no community outpouring of support like there would be for a teenager who died of cancer or in a car accident. Shame and stigma keep people away. I believe addiction needs to be addressed and embraced like any other chronic, progressively fatal illness or disease before real changes can be made in our communities and before the shame and stigma can be eliminated. Addiction is not a choice. It is not a character flaw. And it does not discriminate. The stigma of addiction started back in the 1930s when scientists began studying addictive behavior because people addicted to drugs and alcohol were thought to be morally flawed. Those views shaped society's response to addiction, treating it as a moral failing rather than a health problem, which led to an emphasis on punishment rather than prevention and treatment. And alcohol addiction was declared a disease by the American Medical Association way back in 1954. Welcome to 2019, where addiction is still viewed by many as a lack of willpower or as a character flaw, and is amazingly approached with punishment rather than treatment in many communities. The punishment approach brings with it a powerful shame and stigma that influences our laws, services, research, healthcare, and support for people with the disease of addiction. Now more than ever, we must be driven by the data and the facts and recognize the science behind the chronic brain disease of addiction. Scientists, physicians, and even the Surgeon General agree that addiction is a disease. When people with a chronic disease of addiction, their brain gets hijacked in a biological way, manipulating dopamine levels that tell the person that the highest priority in their life is the addiction and the only choices are drugs and alcohol. It's hard for people to accept the concept that addiction is a disease. I know how hard it is because I didn't believe it myself. I thought I could make the right choices and do the right thing. But after relapsing for 8 years and literally thinking that I was insane, I now understand that no one would choose that life. No one chooses drug overdoses, or to lose everything in their life because of meth, or to die from years of addiction to alcohol, like so many of my friends have, and my good friend Patrick. With compassion, we need true understanding, and sometimes that understanding comes from having the humility and courage to unlearn things that we have held as truths for our entire lives. A universal acceptance of the disease of addiction across our nation will save lives and provide futures for our next generation of innovators and leaders. It may come as a surprise to you, but there is actually a simple solution to eliminating the stigma of addiction. A solution where everyone across our nation can participate. The simple solution is talk. I learned about this simple solution when I first heard William Moyers speak. I'm here today as an advocate because I was inspired by William to come out of the closet about my own addiction and recovery journey. You see, when I heard William speak, he challenged everyone to talk about addiction and recovery. And I realized at that moment that my desire and ability to help others was stronger than my shame. It was early in my days as a First Lady when I decided to reveal my addiction and recovery during an interview with the newspaper. Since then, using my lived experience and my role as First Lady, I've connected with awe-inspiring advocates, with parents whose children have overdosed, and officials in the White House, including the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and Counselor to the President, Kellyanne Conway, as well as the current inspiring Surgeon General. I always want to say Attorney General, or Surgeon General. The basis of my advocacy is encouraging everyone to talk about addiction and how it has impacted their lives. Those in recovery sharing their stories, caregivers talking about those that they help who are struggling with addiction, people in public service talking about addiction and recovery, and corporations creating safe environments to talk about addiction and recovery at work. Talk will eliminate the elephant in the room and normalize the conversation around addiction. If we do this, the stigma will be eliminated, more people will seek treatment and find recovery, and everyone who is talking about addiction will be saving lives. This is a grassroots movement that costs nothing. It needs no legislation and could easily be the one thing that crosses all political party lines to unify and truly make a difference for our nation. In North Dakota, we are using evidence-based methods to create a system to measure our progress on eliminating stigma. In collaboration with our behavioral health team and the Addiction Policy Forum in Washington, D.C., we launched the first of its kind survey that measured a baseline of the stigma of the disease of addiction in North Dakota. This type of survey, solely focused on stigma, has not occurred in any other state. We are the first. The survey results are informing us of the progress that is being made. It's identifying the gaps and the policies that can reduce the social barriers to care. As a state, we continue to emphasize that addiction does not discriminate and it can happen to anyone. Our stigma survey showed that 60% of the respondents had been impacted by addiction, validating that it touches all families, businesses, and communities regardless of ethnicity, gender, age, or socioeconomic status. The survey also showed that 63% of North Dakotans believe that addiction is a disease, which is a good thing. However, it still means that 1 in 3 people in our state believe that addiction is a choice or a moral failing. Progress will be made when everyone recognizes the science of addiction and moves towards a holistic system that treats it like any other chronic, progressively fatal disease. Data will show if we're moving the needle. Data helps drive funding. Data changes minds and creates systems to ultimately save lives. During the first couple years in my role as First Lady, I spent most of my time connecting with individuals and groups associated with addiction, treatment, and recovery. Every one of these groups and people inspired and motivated me, and they're key figures in helping us reinvent recovery. They are already convinced that addiction is a disease, and that stigma needs to be eliminated so more people reach out for help and more lives will be saved. But I know there is opportunity elsewhere to move the needle on eliminating stigma. To bring about transformative change, I believe it's critical to extend my advocacy to the 1 in 3 people who believe addiction is a choice. To those who have the opportunity to unlearn old truths. I'm calling this my Winning the Hearts and Minds initiative, or preaching outside the choir. I'm getting in front of groups who may disagree with many of the things that I'm sharing with you today. I'm talking to these groups about the brain science of addiction and also sharing the data that shows incarceration is ineffective in addressing addiction. The power in sharing personal stories can bridge the gap of disbelief and help others understand that a culture of support will bring sustained recovery to those on the path from addiction to recovery. This past week, I spoke to a Chamber of Commerce in North Dakota. I shared all of the reasons why combating the disease of addiction should matter to them, as well as why it's important to eliminate the stigma of addiction in the workplace. Of the 23 million people in the United States that have the disease of addiction, 60% of them are employed full-time. $82 billion a year are lost in workplace productivity due to employees' heavy drinking. And the Surgeon General projects that our nation spends $442 billion a year to combat the effects of addiction. These facts and figures are substantial, but what perhaps might have been even more persuasive to the chamber group is when I told them about my own experience. I told them I would not have been speaking to them that day if not for the supportive work environment and the amazing team leader I had when I reached out for help at work, when I was at my lowest point and decided I needed treatment. I challenged the Chamber of Commerce business leaders to eliminate the stigma at work, to provide resources and opportunities to educate on the disease of addiction so that those struggling feel supported where they spend most of their time. As some of you may already know, one of the best ways to encourage and keep recovery is to celebrate recovery. And one of the best ways to eliminate the stigma of addiction is to be a face and voice of recovery. Since we held our first Recovery Reinvented in 2017, we have sought to recognize the courage and the strengths of those who have found recovery. This past December, when I spoke at the North Dakota Government to Government Native American conference hosted by my husband, the governor, I asked anyone in recovery to stand and be recognized. When people stood, it was honestly one of the most powerful moments in my life. Native Americans, government employees, and others standing together to be the faces of recovery. Some people stood to be publicly recognized for the first time ever. I made the same request when I spoke at the Chamber of Commerce event, and let me tell you, you could have heard a pin drop when I asked people to stand. But several people stood and were recognized at a work event. So I would like to do the same today. Join me and be a face of recovery. I invite everyone in this room who is in recovery to stand for your courage, your hope, and to inspire others. Please stand now. Yay. Those in recovery, remain standing if you would. Whether you are in recovery or not, whether you are personally struggling, if you have lost someone, this disease touches almost all of our lives in some way. Standing together in solidarity is how we are going to truly bring an end to the stigma. I would now like to invite all of you in this room who are impacted by addiction to stand as well. Okay, you can all sit now. Thank you for your courage to be recognized this afternoon. The simple act of standing for your recovery may be the one thing that inspires someone else in this room to reach out for help today. And for all of you, keep talking about the disease of addiction and recovery. Find 3 people today to have a conversation with about addiction and recovery. You will all be eliminating stigma and saving lives in the process. I would like to invite all of you to join us in the great state of North Dakota to reinvent recovery. This year, we are excited to hold our 3rd Recovery Reinvented event on November 12th in our capital city, Bismarck, North Dakota. We are always looking for innovation, change makers, and those who are passionate about changing the narrative. Reach out and connect with our team and attend a day of inspiration that turns dialogue into action. This event will be live streamed over the internet, so go to recoveryreinvented.com to learn more. Now is the time to put aside stereotypes, to put aside intolerance. Now is the time to come together to help those suffering from the disease of addiction. Now is the time for every one of us to take action in our lives, in our work, and in our communities. There's no shame in addiction. And there is so much hope and possibility in recovery. I'm like more than 23 million other people across our great nation who have the disease of addiction. And I am a face and voice of recovery. Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to hold on to this one. Okay, thank you, Catherine, the First Lady for Recovery in America. Yay! At this time, I'm going to ask the chairs to be set up out here in the front. We're going to have a little Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes or so. I know there's some people who have questions because they've texted them to me and so on, but you're going to have to ask them yourself. I'm not going to do it for you. So let's get the chairs out here. We have 2 mics, one to the left and one to the right. We would prefer that you use the mic because people who are receiving the live stream of this won't hear it if you just shout it out from the audience. However, I can also repeat it if you'd prefer to ask it to me. So we'll get our speakers to come on out. And I would like, I guess the mics are live back there at the back. Oh, here they are. They're being set up here now. So who's got a question? Come on, this is your time to get to 5 Sudtalk speakers. You got a question and a comment. So here's what I need you to do, actually, if you don't mind. Actually, come here. Well, you can't reach it. So go ahead and I'll repeat it. Well, you'd be surprised. Yay! Woo! And I see you've got some of your brethren here too, right? Yeah, they're all good-looking guys who are out there fighting those fires and helping. Your mentors. All right, way to go, guys.
We use your services and your facilities probably more than most. It's not something that we're proud of, but we're humans. And when we sign up in a profession to give our lives, never having the opportunity to meet you, to see your face, to know your name, to know anything about you, and we see the things that we see every day, and we deal with the issues that we deal with every day, such as addiction and substance abuse, because when there's a problem with that, normally it means someone's going to call 911, and normally one of us is going to show up. And not only do we have to deal with it, we suffer from it. More than most. I know for me in 2004, on Valentine's Day, I lost 5 children in a house fire. What do? Do you start your life the next day as if it never happened the day before? No. You look to cope with it. But my comment more for you guys is, I am a government employee. I am. There is a stigma with us. Tell them a fireman, when things in your life go bad, who do you call? You don't call a politician. You certainly don't. You call a fireman because most likely we're going to solve it quick. That's what you do. 911, we're probably going to show up and help you out. You hope. But in our profession, it's nice that we can talk about addiction and we can discuss addiction. But we can't. Understand that we can't. When they talk about communication and sharing, it's something that we can do amongst each other. But we can't do it out here. We can't do it in public. I can't go to a house where you've called me to help your mother, your grandmother, and say, hey, listen, I'm a recovering alcoholic. But let me tell you why, because they don't want to hear the why. They just want to say, holy shit, I don't want this person on fire truck helping me. I give my life for you, but they don't want to hear your story or why. What do you recommend to something, a profession such as this? Such as a police officer, such as a soldier. We come back from Iraq, yeah, we have PTSD. Most of us did. Most of us do. We got 25 years of a career with PTSD, but it leads to these addictions. It's what we know is the normal now. It's how we cope.
So your question then is, how do you as public servants, particularly who work in the government sector, how do you become beacons of hope or advocates for the cause that brings us here today, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
My comment would be this. Communication is everything. Don't judge. That's the first thing. Don't judge. Be thankful. Be appreciative. Be humble. But maybe in your direction or in your speaking to other people. And then the basic facts of reality is, hey, it's a blanket thing. There's a problem in the entire nation, the entire world, without a doubt. But a lot of those people who are dealing with those problems, we deal with them ourselves. But yet we can't go to our employer and say, hey, we got a problem. Because when we do, we're gone, we're fired.
So let's get let me get some comment from our experts here about that. Thank you, sir, for sharing, and thank you for your good work. So, Andrew, why don't you tackle that one to start?
So, first of all, congratulations on being Mr. February in the Fireman's Magazine. That's a big, big honor. No, but seriously, first responders, I mean, if we really look at what's going on in this country, if we really look at the epidemic, first responders are the front line in preventing people from dying. And you guys, particularly down here, have been really proactive about making sure that first responders carry Narcan, connecting people with services, setting up warm handoff programs, all of these things. And so, you know, you're right. Like, you deserve help as well, because you're the ones out there saving our lives. You know, and it's not that way everywhere in the country. I mean, if you overdose in America, you better hope that you're in a state and even a county or a city where the first responders are going to resurrect you instead of sending you home in a body bag. So I 100% agree with you. I think we do need to have help for our helpers, as well as just expecting them to save us.
Please, Dr. Howard.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think, you know, you were talking so much about stigma and barriers to treatment, and certainly it's even more magnified in healthcare professionals and especially first responders. I think some of my research has actually been in interventions for first responders and how to address secondary traumatic stress. So I think it's really, really important to speak with your peers like you've been doing, and how important self-care is and positive coping, because the stress that you endure is horrific, and to say that it's not impacting you isn't transparent. So I'm glad you brought that point up. Very important.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. We have a question over here. And if you wouldn't mind, if you're comfortable identifying yourself and where you're from, that would be great, but you don't have to.
Yes, my name is this on? Yes. Rodman Steele. I've been involved in the state of Florida here. I'm from West Palm Beach, but I've worked for the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program Foundation and helped to create that, and in fact incorporated a few years ago. So directed to Scott Strode primarily, but everybody. There are two big things happening through research and whatnot. We're finding that there are physiological changes with exercise, very important, prefrontal cortex, and how that's changing and helping and assisting people being able to shake addiction. And then, of course, the psychological and the psychiatric side of it that the First Lady mentioned and everything, which is very, very important in the change of stigma. Scott, you've got them both. You've got the camaraderie, you've got the physical changes going on with your exercise. Can you weigh one against the other, or are they both equally important, and how do you evaluate it?
I mean, I think that at first when people come to the Phoenix, the hook that keeps them coming back, just to use terminology from the old days, what keeps them coming back is that dopamine response, the exercise, the pushing themselves and having their brain wake up again in a different way without a drink or a drug in the system. But I think what keeps them long term is the tribe that they're building around them while they're there. You know, when I show up and I'm having a bad day and I fist bump with my new friends in the gym and we do a hard workout, usually by the end I forget what I was so stressed about anyway. So the exercise is certainly a powerful piece of it. But we've also seen Phoenix be successful just in social events. And it's the same kind of tribe that you have in the firehouse. You know, it's like it's your crew. They'll be there for you no matter what. And having that gives you courage to step into recovery in a different way. So I think it's both.
Thank you, Scott. Another question, comment? Here we go, please, thank you. And if you're comfortable, identify yourself and where you're from.
I'm comfortable. So my name is Alan Barsky, and I'm from north of North Dakota, Regina, Saskatchewan, if anyone from North Dakota knows, but currently at Florida Atlantic University. More recently, I came from the lighthouse at Hillsborough Inlet. Just climbed to the top of it, and it was interesting on the ride over to the inlet, the captain said, you have to go up to the top because when you look down, you see all the people in the ocean, surrounded by sharks, and they're kind of oblivious to it. So coming here to the Beacons of Hope, I was thrilled to hear how each of you are changing and expanding the narratives on substance use disorders. My question for the panel is, how do we make sure that this discussion extends to all sorts of different cultures and socioeconomic backgrounds, and making sure that we're attending to some of the stigma that apply there as well?
Susan, do you want to start with that one?
Okay, I think I understood you to ask how we can spread this, make it more contagious.
And particularly, so it's not just a white audience or middle-class audience, but making sure we're really extending it to all groups.
I just think what we can all do is talk about it incessantly, until people fall asleep. And I think, as you were saying, Mr. February, it doesn't get talked about enough. And as we've all said, I mean, we're a pretty hopeful bunch up here, but we've all talked about not being able to talk about it. And that is still the way of the world outside of, I don't know that much about Florida, so that's still the way of the world in New York City, and I'm not going to tell my Harvard story, right? So people don't want to talk about it, and many times they don't want to know about it. And I think you just have to find a way to connect with them and talk about it. And I think every room full of people that goes out and talks about it makes a difference.
Catherine, you have talked about it on the reservation, among other places. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in North Dakota, the average lifespan on our reservations is 58 years old. Because of the health effects from addiction and other health-related things like diabetes. And so we have, the governor has an initiative called Tribal Engagement. I also have an initiative to do what I can to partner with the tribes, because they are part of a system that's completely broken, a 100-year-old system that is not working for them anymore. And so, when people, say, well, they have their own Indian health thing and whatever, but, it's just, we need to come together. Every Native American in our state is a citizen of our state. They are, we need to wrap our arms around them and help them and partner with them more. So we've got some great progress happening on, we have a youth council that created this strategic plan for development for their community. It's everything from, getting grocery stores started to programs, and so engaging the youth. And we have another, a woman who started the first recovery community organization in our state on the reservation. We don't have any of those. And so though, we're engaging Native Americans, we're partnering with them because they're very concerned. There's just meth is a really big issue on the reservation. But the other situations, I've been a part of, several different roundtable discussions. I challenged the director of the CDC. I was on their website trying to learn about what are they doing to combat the stigma of addiction. And they have a lot of great information about the stigma of HIV and nothing about the stigma of addiction. So I spoke at an event where he spoke, and I sort of publicly said, hey, how about this? Anyway, so, I think it's, this roundtable discussion I had was an opioid round. There were a lot of different people there from a lot of different walks of life. And so it just really is continuing to say, we just need to keep talking about it. But, how do we specifically target different cultures? I don't know. I just think we just have to, talk about it everywhere.
Andrew?
Just real quick for extra credit from the Phyllis and Harvey Sandler School of Social Work. I'm just kidding, actually. Dr. Barsky's part of the faction with Nilise Luna, who doesn't believe in great inflation and does not give extra credit, having had both of them as professors. But anyway, no, this is a really good point that you're bringing up, though, because, we know how to treat people. We don't have a problem getting doctors into treatment. We don't have a problem getting lawyers, judges, pilots, basically anyone with a trade association behind them. But when we talk about poor, double and triple marginalized, socioeconomically disadvantaged populations, those are the people that are really falling through the cracks because we don't have equitable access to care. We don't have treatment on demand. We do not have an equitable system that gets people better at the same rate. You look at how, doctors have no problem because they get 3 months of inpatient, probably over with William, and then they get 9 months after that of subacute cares, followed by 5 years of subacute care communal support programs. And they recover at unbelievably high rates as a direct result of that. But when we're talking about poor people, we're willing to spend $75,000 a year keeping them incarcerated, 20 years at $1.5 million of taxpayer funding. But if they ask for help, like, we don't have any money. We never have any money when people ask for help. Oh, but if we get you, we got services immediately. Click, click.
The question.
I want to say thank you for reading my mind. My name is Frank Mussolini. I've been in the substance abuse field in one way or another, starting with my personal journey in the early 70s, and been involved with treatment ever since. I'm currently working at a Baker Act receiving hospital, dealing with just the clientele that you're talking about. And I have to tell you that being in the field this long, I do feel like I'm part of a broken system. I feel like the system is broken from the federal level on down. Okay, and I'm going to just say that I see people in a Baker Act receiving hospital receiving $1,000 Band-Aids for $100 problems. They need a place to go, so the police Baker Act them, and we treat them with $1,000 a day treatment. And our federal government is paying for it. Medicare patients get special treatment because they can stay longer. And then, unfortunately, the patients I see who have Medicaid or no insurance, I have 5 days to try and foster a desire for change, and I'm good, and I can't do it. I can do it with maybe 1 in 100, and I am good, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see that we can't get through to a segment of people because our federal government keeps them sick. They give them $600 to $700 a month, and that's just enough for one good load, and then living on the street and coming back next month. I see patients sometimes 10 times in a year. So my question is, what are we doing on a federal level to address the broken system? I'll sit down.
Catherine, you know about that, and Scott will go to you after.
Yeah, you're like literally doing it.
Well, I've been fortunate to be called to DC quite a few times to meet with the people that are, trying to make a difference at that level. The dollars being targeted to try to make the system better, the work being done, in so many different ways. I mean, I guess I would say that it's not perfect, but and there's still a long way to go. But at least there's more money being spent than there ever has been for a while on this topic, and especially related to opioids, which is a bigger issue, across the nation. But obviously, there needs to be equality. There needs to be parity. The parity thing, it's not happening like it needs to be. So I guess I'm grateful that there is discussion at the federal level, and there is work being done, and there is money being put towards it. But obviously, there's still more equality that needs to happen for sure.
Yeah,
Scott, and then we'll go to Dr. Howard. Scott, go ahead.
And that's honestly why I'm sort of calling for that idea of creative destruction, right? Like, let's come up with something better. And let's not wait for it to come down from the federal government. Let's do it in our communities. I mean, sitting right out here, we have temperance training, which is a program very similar to Phoenix. And they have free programs every week for anybody who's 48 hours clean and sober. They can show up at their gym and take part of this new tribe that'll help support them in recovery. And that, yeah, it's right here in town. They're right there. So raise your hand, guys. So make sure you talk to them after, or you come tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to CrossFit Hype and you work out with us. Because it's free, and we don't have to wait for some federal grant to show up to make it happen.
Heather?
Well, I just want to say that Scott said I could be his partner tomorrow at 9 a.m., and I'm going to do it. I'm really excited. So I'm excited to work with you all. But, you know, just addressing what Dr. Barsky stated, we're talking about socioeconomic status, right? And addressing housing and addressing unemployment and addressing all these things we don't know are associated with substance use. So it's, and having, and reducing isolation, you know, through encouraging these community and peer support. We have to, we can all create recovery-oriented communities.
Question.
Yeah, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for coming here. First of all, my name is Thomas DiBartolo. I'm a local addiction professional. I've been working in the field since 2006. And this question, for anybody in the panel wants to field, I think there's two pieces of this conversation I've been talking about regarding the industry itself. One is, for a lot of people that work in this field, case managers, therapists, all that, like these first responders, we're dealing with trying to help people get clean and save their lives. However, I think one of the problems is the kind of pay, the wages that people in the field are actually making. I heard people say, I read stuff in the newspaper recently about people leaving this field, going to work at Walmart and Costco. They can make more money that way. They're fighting with it. They're not getting paid what they're worth for what they're doing. That's number one. The other piece that is too, I think the other thing that's been talked about is how the recovery community kind of works together. I hear a lot of talk about that, but going to a lot of events in this county the last several years, including going to the meetings of the Palm Beach County Substance Awareness Coalition, I don't see a lot of treatment facilities, at least not that I hear of, having bed space for people if you don't have good insurance or if you don't have $20,000 in your pocket to walk into a place. They're going to go, unless they have scholarships, and that's few and far between, sorry, we can't help you. Where do you go? And everyone at these meetings I go to looks around the room, and there is no place for you to go, at least not yet, or not any place decent. So I think those are two things that really need to be addressed as far as, obviously, the professionals getting paid what they're worth in some of these fields. Like I said myself, I bounced around several jobs, not that I even wanted to in some cases, simple the fact that I wasn't making a good enough living. I had to move to something to make more money. And what I guess the recovery community is doing in general to kind of offer bed space for people that they know aren't going to get paid just to help them out.
Sure. Go ahead. Who would like to tackle that one? Andrew?
Sure. I mean, you know, what you're talking about is a fundamental problem with the funding mechanism, right? So we have a couple proposals that we're pushing right now in DC. One of them is on shifting to a values-based care, outcome-based reimbursement model, specifically to drop, because it's actually, even if you have decent insurance, a lot of times the insurance companies they're really squeezing the middle class out of access to care with, exorbitantly high deductibles and, and that actually feeds into your other question in terms of like paying people what they're worth and not expecting, healthcare workers to accept poverty wages for what, let's be honest, is not a 40-hour-a-week job. So, one of the proposals basically is that you shift and you have insurance companies pay 50% of the reimbursable rate at every single level of care across an entire continuum of care. And then if there's no acute care episodes, so no detox, no residential treatment, no emergency room, then the insurance payer pays an additional 100% for a total of 150%, which motivates success. I mean, you're financially paying for wellness as opposed to paying for sickness. The other one, which is actually significantly more important, and what we're really going to have to do in the grand scheme of things, is we're going to have to shift to legislatively structuring transferable tax credits. Because here's the problem, right? The way that you deal with a public health crisis is you raise taxes and then you have money to pay for services. But we're never going to do that because we hate taxes more than we hate poor people dying in this country, which is an entirely separate problem and a whole nother conversation. But what you can do is you can legislatively structure tax credits that are transferable to other industries. We have them in agriculture, we have them in the entertainment, and you go shoot a movie in Atlanta, you're getting like a $10 million tax credit, right? So what you need to do is you structure them so that anyone can just walk into treatment anywhere. And then if you have like a nonprofit treatment center, they just bundle those up. Then they go hit up like the Marriott, and you're like, hey man, here's $10 million in tax liability reduction. Federal tax credits are trading for 94 cents on the dollar with like $9.4 million in cash, and you literally are able to treat every single person in this county that needs services.
Catherine, go ahead, and then we'll come to you in a second. Go ahead, Catherine.
Can I say one thing? So I'm glad you brought up the pay for wellness, because in North Dakota we're doing this thing called Free Through Recovery, where we diverted $7 million to help people that were either at jeopardy of going to prison or, or were sentenced there. And so they're diverted away from prison. They're diverted back to their community, where we've got care coordinators who hire peer support specialists. And so we're meeting people where they are at home, which doesn't require sober living places and treatment centers. I mean, obviously, there's a need for both of those as well, and then those care coordinators are paid for wellness. And that's something that was part of the criminal justice system, but now we've got a bill of the legislature to open that up to the general public, because in general, we need to pay for wellness. Like, did they get a job? Do they have a place to live? Are they going to meetings? Are they working a recovery program? And that's a program that's not happening in any other state. And it has reduced recidivism, parole violations, and that sort of thing.
Susan, quick.
Yeah, I just want to say, you've heard today about an incredible program that's free, 2 of them, Alcoholics Anonymous and the Phoenix. So, if what a person wants is treatment, there are plenty of places they can get it in the most extreme and complete way for no money.
Question next, right here.
Can I respond to that, please?
Let's go to the next person. And you know what? You can talk to, we're going to have our guest speakers going to be out in the lobby afterwards if anyone wants to follow up. Go ahead.
My name is Maria Faber, and I lost my son last year to an overdose. And my question is, and thank you all for being here.
I'm so sorry, can you speak up just a tiny bit?
Yeah. I'm sorry, it's a little difficult. My name is Maria Faber, and I lost my son to an overdose, a 27-year-old last year. And all the issues you brought up are very, very important. One thing, however, that I think there is a big flaw is the model of treatment that there's out there, because this 30-day stint rehab that cost the families thousands and thousands, the tune of $28,000 or more a month, and that we don't have, and that we go and borrow, and you know the whole nightmare involved with addiction. And then they're out, and the recommendation is go to a halfway house, where they go, and I get it, the whole we and support, because they're all in the same boat, but they're all struggling with the same issues. And they don't have any support in these places at all. So they're pretty much saying, okay, 30 days where they're hardly detoxed. And they're sent out there, and they're supposed to get a job, find themselves a therapist, do all of this stuff when they cannot even get themselves in their head. They're not even together yet to do anything. So is there anybody thinking of this model of that this may be changed? And
Go ahead.
Because it really is not working.
Scott?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm so sorry for your loss. And Phoenix, we hear about from hundreds of loved ones, every year who have somebody struggling or have lost somebody. And I agree. The system, doing more of what we're doing isn't going to fix this issue. Just simply adding more of something that isn't working that well isn't going to get us there. We need to think about how we're doing this in our country and do it differently. We really do, because I don't know an answer for you. The system itself needs to be done differently.
I'm not sure what's happening here or where you are with peer support specialists, but for us in North Dakota, 50% of our population is rural, So we're never going to have treatment centers and sober houses in all of our communities, but the peer support specialists with lived experience, we're all in on that concept because, you know, just like you say, after 30 days, you don't have, you know, you're not, but if you have someone with lived experience who's a resource who can help connect you to where you need to be in the community, you know, in my opinion, that's a great answer to those people that are, because the gap between treatment and recovery is the biggest risk. So the peer support specialist model, to me, really addresses that gap.
Yeah, but
Question
what-
over there.
Yes, actually, my name's Lynn, and I'm actually a graduate student here at FAU in the social work program. And first of all, I just wanted to say to the lady over there, I'm very sorry for your loss. And to the panel, thank you. I love the diversity, the different areas and the different viewpoints that we get. And addiction is very close to me. I am in recovery myself. I had a mother who overdosed of an opiate addiction and a father who's incarcerated. So addiction hits very close to home to me. And, you know, I just want to say that, you know, I don't believe that there's one quick fix. It's multiple systems, it's multiple people, it's multiple professions, it's a variety of academics, and they all work together. There is no one thing, but there is one thing that will save an addict, and that's another person. You know, if you have some kind of support, or if you're that support person, because there isn't an addict on this planet that can do this alone. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you for your comment. Last question over here, and then we're going to be done.
John O'Brien, in recovery since 2000, MCAP student. Question for you guys. I love your emphasis on getting rid of the stigma of addiction and rewriting the narrative. My question for you is about the developmental model of recovery that does justice to the brain science. Could you briefly address that?
So the question is...
The developmental model of addiction. Doing justice to the brain science,
yeah.
explaining
Go ahead,
it.
Dr. Howard.
And maybe I know what it is, but I don't know that terminology.
Go ahead, Dr.
Well, I think when you're thinking about developmental, it really starts in this attachment period. You know, Scott talked about having healthy attachment. You know, 0 to 3 is so essential, really, in the very young infancy stage of having all the correct brain connections. And that is it's becoming a new science and really understanding the brain disease. And I think that helps decrease the stigma, absolutely, but that we understand that it is a disease and very complex.
Today is one day in this next step towards helping people who are not here today, those who are not yet experiencing the beacons of hope and help and healing. So I hope each of you will carry from here today something and take it back into your communities, into your schools, into your churches, and to wherever it is you think you can help somebody from what you've learned here today. Let's also remember that next year we want to double the size of the people who have attended this today. And so if you all have liked what you've heard today, please talk about the positive experience you had so that we can develop some buzz in the community, sober buzz in the community, so that we can turn them out big time next year. I also want to thank ShowPro for all the audiovisual technical stuff that happened. It was flawless. And finally, I want to thank all of our speakers and all of you for being part of the solution today. Good night.
We love you, Tony.